Write down the posterior triangle boundaries. Posterior triangle boundaries. Anteriorly, posterior border of sternocleidomastoid. Anteriorly, posterior border of sternocleidomastoid. Posteriorly, anterior border of trapezius. Anterior border of trapezius. Next, base is formed by the base. Base is formed by the medial 1/3 of the clavicle. Medial 1/3 of the clavicle. Base, medial 1/3. Medial 1/3 of the clavicle. Next, apex is formed by the medial 2/3 रहते मगर ये triangle 1/3 में रहते. Apex is formed by the meeting point. Apex is formed by the meeting point of sternocleidomastoid and trapezius. Sternocleidomastoid and trapezius. Okay. Next, roof. Roof is formed by the skin, superficial fascia, part of platysma, part पूरा नहीं क्यों? See here like this, only part. यहाँ पे नहीं रहते platysma, because platysma is attached to the lower border of the mandible. Mandible यहाँ तक end है ना, यहाँ तक ही रहते, इसके पीछे नहीं रहते. Okay? So part of platysma and investing layer of deep cervical fascia. Investing layer of deep cervical fascia. Next, floor is formed by the floor. Floor is formed by the scalenus anterior muscle. Scalenus anterior muscle. Next, scalenus medius. Next, scalenus posterior. Next, levator scapulae. Splenius capitis and semispinalis capitis. Okay. Capitis means neck. Okay. Next, posterior triangle subdivides into two triangles. Two triangles by the inferior belly of omohyoid. See here, this one is the inferior belly of omohyoid. It separates the two triangles. Number one, first triangle. Number one, occipital triangle. The dotted line cut the occipital triangle. Next, number two, supraclavicular triangle. First, occipital triangle boundaries. occipital triangle boundaries. Antero superiorly లేకపోతే ఇట్లా కూడా రాయొచ్చు. Antero superior. Antero superiorly posterior border of sternocleidomastoid. Antero superiorly posterior border of sternocleidomastoid. Antero inferiorly antero inferiorly inferior belly of omohyoid. Antero inferiorly inferior belly of omohyoid. Next, posteriorly anterior border of the trapezius. Posteriorly anterior border of the trapezius. Okay. Next, roof is formed by apex ante idi. Apex is formed by the apex and rasko. Apex is formed by the meeting point of sternocleidomastoid and inferior belly of omohyoid. Inferior belly of omohyoid. Okay na? Omohyoid. Next, roof is formed by the roof is formed by the skin, superficial fascia, part of platysma and investing layer of deep cervical fascia. Are you getting? Next, floor is formed by the part of scalenus medius, then scalenus posterior, levator scapulae అన్ని ఇందాకనే రాసుకున్నారుగా. levator scapulae. Next, splenius capitis, semispinalis capitis. Are you getting? Next, come to the contents. Number 1, occipital artery. Number 1, occipital artery. Number 2, lesser occipital nerve. Number 2, lesser occipital nerve. Number 3, great auricular nerve. So this nerve enters into the scalp. Scalp lo manam posterior side చూసాం కదా ఈ nerves. So क्या नाम देखे, lesser occipital भी देखे अपन, greater auricular भी देखे, है ना? हाँ. Next, transverse cervical branch. Transverse cervical nerve అనండి, branch అనకండి. Transverse cervical nerve. Next, third cervical nerve. Next, fourth cervical nerve. third cervical nerve, fourth cervical nerve. Next, spinal part of accessory nerve, spinal part of accessory nerve. Spinal part of accessory nerve. Next, supraclavicular nerve, supraclavicular nerve, dorsal scapular nerve, dorsal scapular nerve. So these are the contents of the dorsal scapular nerve. These are the contents of the occipital triangle. Next, come to the supraclavicular triangle. Supraclavicular triangle boundaries. Above inferior belly of omohyoid, below medial 1/3 of the clavicle, anteriorly posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid, anteriorly posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid. Next, roof is formed by the skin, superficial fascia, part of platysma, and investing layer of deep cervical fascia. Investing layer of deep cervical fascia. Next, floor is formed by the scalenus anterior. Next, part of scalenus medius. Then come to the contents. Ivanni contents చూడండి. Number 1, superficial cervical artery. Superficial cervical artery, subclavian vein, subclavian artery, subclavian vein, subclavian artery, phrenic nerve, phrenic nerve. Next, upper trunk, middle trunk and lower trunk of the brachial plexus. Upper trunk, middle trunk and lower trunk of the brachial plexus. Upper trunk, middle trunk, lower trunk of the brachial plexus. Upper trunk, middle trunk, lower trunk. Upper trunk, middle trunk, lower trunk of the brachial plexus. Next, suprascapular artery, suprascapular artery and suprascapular nerve. Suprascapular artery, suprascapular nerve. Next, nerve to subclavius and long thoracic nerve. So these all are the contents of the supraclavicular triangle. So posterior triangle finished. Next, come to the suboccipital triangle boundaries. ఇంకొక ట్రయాంగిల్ ఇది ఒకటి అయితే అయిపోతుంది. చాలా సార్ ఒక గంట ఉంది చాలా అంటే అట్లా కావాలంటే 5 minutes బ్రేక్ తీసుకోవడం చాలా ఉండదు ఇప్పుడు ఇది అయిపోయిన తర్వాత బ్రేక్ ఓకే సబ్ ఆక్సిపిటల్ ట్రయాంగిల్ బౌండరీస్ sub occipital triangle boundaries see here the sub occipital triangle so the C1 C2 okay see here the C1 one muscle arises from here runs up to inferior nuchal line बोले तो see here this one is the external occipital protuberance so this one is the inferior nuchal line and this one is a superior nuchal line so up to inferior nuchal line so this muscle we called as RCP minor RCP minor RCP minor means rectus capitis rectus capitis posterior minor RCP means rectus capitis posterior minor next muscle is a RCP major मेजर అంటే పెద్ద ఉంది మైనస్ छोटा है सो माइनस C1 तक गए और ये C2 तक तो ये बड़ा है इसको क्या बोलते हैं RCP मेजर सो मीडियली राइट मीडियली RCP మైనర్ అంటే మొత్తం రాయండి मीडियली RCP మైనర్ and RCP major rectus capitis posterior minor rectus capitis posterior major it will be medially okay next superolaterally oblique capitis superior muscle oblique capitis superior okay superior oblique capitis okay next superolaterally then inferiolaterally oblique capitis inferior oblique capitis inferior are you getting so this one is the meeting point apex is the base apex is formed by the apex is formed by the meeting point of oblique capitis superior oblique capitis inferior meeting point of oblique capitis superior oblique capitis inferior okay next floor is formed by the floor is formed by the posterior atlanto-occipital membrane posterior atlanto-occipital membrane next one Posterior arch of atlas. Posterior arch of atlas. Okay, so these are from the floor. Next, roof is formed by the roof. Roof is formed by the skin దగ్గర నుంచి వస్తాయి చాలా లేయర్స్ ఉంటాయి. Skin, superficial fascia, రాదు ప్లాటిస్మా రాదు ఇక్కడ బ్యాక్ సైడ్ ఏది ఉంటే వాటికి ఏది వచ్చాడు ప్లాటిస్మా రాదు. ఓకే, స్కిన్, సూపర్ఫిషియల్ ఫేషియా, డీప్ ఫేషియా. ఓకే, నెక్స్ట్ trapezius muscle. trapezius और trapezius भी उठाया समझो. उसके नीचे क्या रहते हैं? semispinalis capitis. trapezius, semispinalis capitis. Next, splenius capitis. splenius capitis ऐसा है. splenius capitis. बस ये पूरा रूफ है. बोले तो पोस्टीरियर ट्रायंगल को पूरा उठाना है. आपको उठाए तो ये मिल जाता है. नहीं पोस्टीरियर ट्रायंगल ऐसा रख के तब ऑक्सीपिटल ट्रायंगल देखेंगे बोले तो नहीं आता. क्या कट करना है? ट्रेपीजियस को कट करना है. ट्रेपीजियस को ऊपर लेना है. सेमी स्पाइनलिस को कट करके ऊपर लेना है. स्प्लेनियस कैपिटस कट करके लैटरल साइड लेना है. उसका नीचे क्या रहता? ट्रायंगल रहता. उसको सब ऑक्सीपिटल ट्रायंगल बोलते हैं. आर यू गेटिंग? हाँ, फर्स्ट आरसीपी में आरसीपी माइनर ऑरिजिन. हाँ, माइनर ऑरिजिन इन सेक्शन रहा है. आरसीपी माइनर ऑरिजिन. RCP minor origin is a posterior arch of the atlas. Posterior arch of the atlas. Once again. Posterior arch of the atlas. It runs above, inserted into the between the superior and inferior nuchal line. Between the minor or manam major. Minor అయితే inferior nuchal line. That is origin. It runs above, inserted into the inferior nuchal line. Oh, minor है. Nuchal line. Okay, next. RCP major originates from the spinous process of C2. Runs above, inserted into the in between the superior nuchal line and inferior nuchal line. Okay, next, oblique capitis superior. Oblique capitis superior originates from the transverse process of C1, transverse process of C1 inserted into the inferior nuchal line, inserted into the inferior nuchal line. Next, of the capitis inferior, originates from the look sir చూడాలమ్మా టెక్స్ట్ బుక్ ఉందా एक बार देखना है so origin it is originates from the second spinal line. once again ఒక్క నిమిషం ఆగండి. Origin, it is originates from the second spinous process C2, second spinous process inserted into the transverse process of the C1, inserted into the transverse process of the C1. Okay, so these are the muscles. Then come to the contents of the suboccipital triangle. Contents of the suboccipital triangle. Number 1, contents number 1, third part of vertebral artery, third part of vertebral artery, third part of vertebral artery. Next, C1 nerve, C1 nerve, దాన్ని ఏమనాలి सब occipital nerve. C1 nerve को क्या बोलते हैं सब occipital nerve. and सब occipital venous plexus, content में सब occipital venous plexus. And these are the contents. Okay, so triangle neck triangles खत्म, finished. यहाँ पे और कुछ भी नहीं है. ओके, इंफ्राहायर ग्रुप मसल्स भी लिख लिया आपने, उसका ऑरिजिन इंसर्शन एक बार आप लोगों का देखना है. ओके, और ट्रेकिया इसोफेगस आप लोगों का पढ़ने का है, ऑलरेडी इसोफेगस पढ़ा है, ट्रेकिया पढ़ना है. సో నెక్ ఖతం हो गया, నెక్ లో ఏం లేదు ఇక ఇంతే ట్రయాంగిల్స్ ఉన్నాయి. ఓకే, ఫేస్ లోపల వచ్చేసి మనకి ఫేషియల్ మజిల్స్. సో ఫేషియల్ మజిల్స్ క్లాస్ లేదా జస్ట్ పేర్లు తెలుసుకుంటే చాలు, నేమ్స్ ఇనఫ్. ఓకే, ఫేషియల్ మజిల్స్